The millionaire's son had been confined to a wheelchair since birth, his legs useless despite the fortune spent trying to make him walk. The wealthy family had hired and fired dozens of medical specialists, yet nothing changed until she arrived. The new black maid, whose mysterious methods would shatter everything they thought they knew. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. Destiny Williams took a deep breath, clutching her worn leather purse against her side as she faced the imposing mahogany doors of the Blake penthouse. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This job wasn't just an opportunity, it was salvation for her family back in Brooklyn, where her mother Sharon's medical bills piled higher each month and her brother Ethan needed stability more than ever. The doorbell's chime echoed through what felt like endless space. When the door finally swung open, Destiny was met with the stoic face of a middle-aged woman who introduced herself as Mrs. Lorraine Blake. The matriarch's eyes were kind but weary, as if they'd witnessed too much sorrow to fully embrace hope again. "Please, come in," Lorraine said, her voice carrying the practiced politeness of Manhattan's elite. "My son is expecting you." The silence inside the penthouse was oppressive, heavier than the polished marble floors beneath Destiny's sensible shoes. The only sound punctuating the stillness was the distant, muffled ticking of an antique grandfather clock, each second stretching the already vast distance between her world and theirs. Matthew Blake stood waiting in the living room, his tall frame silhouetted against floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the Manhattan skyline. His handshake was cold and brief, his eyes sharp with distrust as they assessed her. "Your references were adequate," he stated. The words clipped and businesslike. "You understand that discretion is paramount in this household." It wasn't a question, but Destiny nodded anyway. "Yes, sir. I understand completely." Matthew's jaw tightened as he gestured toward his mother. "You've met Mrs. Blake," he continued, then hesitated before adding, "and now you should meet my son." The reluctance in his voice was palpable as he led her toward a sunroom at the far end of the penthouse. There, bathed in the pale light of a cloudy afternoon, sat a small figure in a wheelchair. "Samuel," Matthew said softly, "this is Miss Williams. She'll be helping us from now on." 4-year-old Samuel Blake didn't respond or look up. The child remained motionless, his small hands resting limply in his lap, his gaze fixed on the grey skyline beyond the window. His pale face showed no recognition that anyone had entered the room or spoken his name. He seemed to be looking through the glass rather than at it, as if hoping the distant clouds might carry him somewhere, anywhere else. Destiny felt her throat tighten. In that moment, she understood that the real weight in this household wasn't the luxury or the expectations. It was the grief that hung in the air, as tangible as the marble beneath her feet. Destiny's first week at the Blake penthouse felt like navigating a minefield. Matthew Blake had presented her with a 3-page document of household protocols on her first day, everything from how to fold Samuel's blankets to the exact temperature at which to serve meals. The mansion's marble floors amplified every footstep, making her feel like an intruder with each movement. "Miss Williams, we prefer the curtains drawn precisely halfway during afternoon hours," Matthew corrected her on the second day, his voice carrying the clipped authority of someone used to being obeyed without question. His eyes, sharp with suspicion, followed her movements as she adjusted the heavy fabric to his specifications. Meals were the worst, silent affairs where the only sounds were silverware against fine china and Samuel's occasional sigh. The 4-year-old remained motionless in his wheelchair, eyes fixed on nothing in particular, his small fingers occasionally twitching against the armrest. Lorraine Blake would attempt conversation, her gentle voice a stark contrast to her son's terse responses, but the efforts inevitably dissolved into uncomfortable silence. "The glasses go on the right side of the plate, Miss Williams," Matthew reminded her during dinner, though she had placed them correctly. It wasn't about the glasses, it was about control, about maintaining the fortress he'd built around his son and his grief. Every evening after her duties ended, Destiny retreated to her small room in the staff quarters to call home. Her mother's voice, weakened by illness but still warm, was her lifeline to reality. "How are you holding up, baby?" Sharon asked, her breathing labored between words. "I'm fine, Mama. The pay is good," Destiny replied, omitting the loneliness, the scrutiny, the feeling of being perpetually judged and found wanting. Later, she would speak with Ethan, her voice strengthening as she promised her brother that soon she'd have enough saved for his college application fees. "Just keep those grades up," she encouraged, hearing the teenage frustration in his voice when he mentioned the crowded conditions of their Brooklyn apartment. After these calls, exhaustion would crash over her in waves. The physical demands of the job were nothing compared to the emotional toll of navigating the Blake family's unspoken grief. Yet each morning, Destiny rose with renewed determination. She studied Matthew's rules, memorized Samuel's schedule, and watched for the smallest openings in their armor. This cold fortress of wealth and sorrow would not defeat her. She had survived too much, fought too hard to be intimidated by marble floors and silver spoons. Somewhere beneath the silence and rigid rules, she sensed a family drowning. And Destiny Williams had never been one to watch someone sink without reaching out her hand. Rain drummed against the penthouse windows, casting the living room in a grey, melancholic light. Destiny Williams had been organizing Samuel Blake's collection of picture books on the low shelf beside his wheelchair, carefully arranging them by color as she'd noticed he preferred. The 4-year-old sat motionless, as always, his gaze fixed on the raindrops racing down the glass, seemingly unaware of her presence. As she placed the final book, a worn copy about dinosaurs, Destiny noticed something extraordinary. Samuel's small fingers twitched, almost imperceptibly, reaching toward the colorful spine. She froze, not wanting to break the spell of this tiny movement. The first voluntary gesture she'd witnessed since starting at the Blake residence 3 weeks ago. "You like dinosaurs, Samuel," she whispered, keeping her voice gentle. The boy didn't respond, his hand retreating back to his lap. Destiny bit her lip, thinking quickly. Then she remembered something in her bag, a simple sock puppet she'd made years ago to entertain Ethan during their mother's hospital stays. Kneeling beside the wheelchair, she slipped the faded blue puppet onto her hand. It was nothing fancy, just googly eyes and red yarn for hair, but it had always made her brother laugh. "Hello there," she said in a silly, high-pitched voice, making the puppet bow dramatically. "I'm Mr. Sockosaurus. I heard someone here likes dinosaurs." The puppet danced in front of Samuel, bobbing and weaving. "Did you know dinosaurs couldn't tie their shoelaces? Their arms were too short." She made the puppet trip and fall with an exaggerated whoopsie. Then it happened, a sound so unexpected that Destiny almost didn't recognize it. A soft, breathy giggle escaped Samuel's lips. It was faint, like the tinkling of a distant wind chime, but unmistakable. The boy's eyes widened slightly, as if he too was surprised by the sound he'd made. Destiny's heart hammered in her chest. According to Lorraine Blake, Samuel hadn't laughed since before his mother's death, over a year ago. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them away quickly. This moment was too precious, too fragile to burden with her emotional response. Instead, she made the puppet do a silly dance, spinning and jumping while whispering nonsensical dinosaur facts. T-Rex had terrible breath because they never flossed. Each ridiculous statement earned another small giggle from Samuel, each laugh growing slightly stronger than the last. For those few magical minutes, the rain outside seemed to fade away. It was just the two of them, sharing something pure and unguarded, a secret language of laughter that needed no words. Destiny knew better than to make a big deal of it. Some miracles needed to unfold slowly, in their own time, without expectation or pressure. Unbeknownst to Destiny Williams, Matthew Blake stood frozen in the hallway, his breath caught in his throat. The sound that had stopped him was so foreign, so unexpected, that for a moment he thought he'd imagined it. His son's laughter, faint but unmistakable, floated through the partially open door like a ghost from happier times. The businessman's fingers tightened around the doorframe as he peered inside. Samuel sat in his wheelchair, eyes bright with something Matthew hadn't seen in over a year: joy. The maid was kneeling before him, that ridiculous sock puppet dancing between them, her Brooklyn accent softened as she created different voices for the character. Matthew stepped back, careful not to be seen. A complicated knot of emotions twisted in his chest: relief, hope, and something darker: jealousy. This woman, this stranger from a different world, had accomplished in days what teams of specialists and therapists and doctors had failed to do in months. The thought stung his pride even as it kindled desperate hope. "Everything all right, sir?" Lorraine's voice startled him. He laughed. "Mother," Matthew whispered, his voice uncharacteristically fragile. Samuel actually laughed. The matriarch's eyes filled with tears as she squeezed her son's arm. "Perhaps it's time we reconsider some things." Later that night, after Destiny had gone to her room and Samuel was asleep, Matthew sat alone in his study. The amber liquid in his glass caught the lamplight as he swirled it absently, replaying the moment over and over. His son's laugh, once as common as birdsong in their home, now as rare and precious as a miracle. He pulled out the thick folder of medical reports, each one more discouraging than the last. Patient shows minimal response to stimuli, withdrawal consistent with trauma. Recommend continued observation. The clinical language blurred before his eyes. What if they were all wrong? What if the rigid structure he'd imposed, the schedules, the routines, the quiet, wasn't helping Samuel heal, but keeping him trapped? Matthew ran his hand over his face, feeling the weight of doubt for the first time since he'd taken control after the accident. The father reached for his smartphone, scrolling through old videos until he found one from before. Samuel running through Central Park, laughing as autumn leaves swirled around him. The contrast between that vibrant child and the silent boy in the wheelchair was devastating. Matthew set down his glass with sudden resolution. If Destiny Williams could reach his son when no one else could, he would swallow his pride and learn from her, even if it meant admitting that his fortress of protection might actually be a prison of his own making. The morning light filtered through the penthouse windows as Destiny Williams entered Samuel Blake's room with renewed hope. Yesterday's breakthrough had left her eager to see that precious smile again. She pulled out the sock puppet, a floppy-eared dog with button eyes, and made it dance across the windowsill. "Good morning, Samuel. Mr. Floppy wants to play," she said cheerfully, her voice carrying the warmth of her Brooklyn upbringing. But the 4-year-old only stared back with distant eyes, his small hands resting motionless on the wheelchair armrests. The magic of yesterday had vanished, replaced by the familiar wall of silence. The puppet that had coaxed out that miraculous giggle now seemed like just another toy in a room full of untouched possessions. Destiny sighed softly. Tucking the puppet into her apron pocket, she knelt beside the boy, careful not to invade his space. "That's okay, sweetheart. We don't have to play today." As she arranged his breakfast tray, she realized something profound. Trust wasn't a switch to be flipped, but a bridge to be built, plank by careful plank. Samuel's world had shattered when his mother died, and his retreat wasn't stubbornness, but self-preservation. Each day would require new patience, new approaches, and most importantly, a willingness to read the language of his silence. In the kitchen later that morning, Destiny prepared Samuel's snack, carefully cutting an apple into star shapes instead of the usual perfect rectangles specified in the household manual. Perhaps a small change might spark something in him, a moment of surprise, a flicker of interest. "What are you doing?" Matthew Blake's voice cut through the kitchen. He stood in the doorway, his tailored suit impeccable despite the early hour. "Just preparing Samuel's snack, Mr. Blake," she answered, continuing her work. The businessman approached, frowning at the star-shaped apple pieces. "The manual clearly states that all food should be cut in uniform rectangles. Samuel needs consistency, not creativity." The reprimand stung, but Destiny noticed something beneath his clipped tone: fear. His rigid rules weren't merely about control, they were lifelines in a world where everything else had fallen apart. "I understand," she replied, reaching for a new apple. Matthew Blake watched her for a moment longer. "My son has had enough change in his life," he said, his voice softening almost imperceptibly. "Every routine we maintain helps him feel safe." As he left, Destiny carefully arranged the rectangular apple slices on the plate, but kept one star hidden beneath a napkin. Perhaps change didn't need to come all at once. Perhaps healing, like trust, could begin with something as small as a forbidden shape, offered not in defiance, but in hope. Destiny began a secret ritual with Samuel Blake. Each night after tucking him in, she'd leave tiny folded notes with cheerful drawings, smiling suns, stick figures holding hands, and little birds soaring across imaginary skies. She hid them like treasures, beneath his pillow, inside his favorite picture books, and tucked into the pockets of his wheelchair. The first time she discovered one of her notes clutched in Samuel's small fist, Destiny's heart nearly burst. The paper was creased and worn, as though he had opened and refolded it countless times during the night. His eyes didn't meet hers, but his grip on the paper told her everything she needed to know. This silent communication became their private language, a bridge slowly forming between their worlds. "I think he's keeping them all," Destiny whispered to Lorraine Blake one afternoon while folding laundry. The grandmother's eyes misted over as she squeezed Destiny's hand in wordless gratitude. Back in Brooklyn, life continued its relentless pace. Ethan Williams slouched against the brick wall of his high school, trying to ignore the taunts from classmates who'd discovered his sister worked for a wealthy Manhattan family. "Your sister scrubbing toilets for rich people now," jeered a boy from his math class. "Bet they don't even know your name." Ethan's fists clenched, but he remembered Destiny's voice from their nightly calls. Every step forward matters, even the tiny ones. He'd heard the exhaustion in her voice, but also the determination when she described Samuel's small victories: a turned head, a held gaze, a paper clutched tight. That evening, while Sharon Williams rested after her medication, Ethan answered Destiny's call. "How's the little guy doing?" he asked, his voice deliberately casual despite the day's humiliations. "He kept 3 notes today," Destiny replied, her voice bright with hope. "And Matthew, Mr. Blake, actually nodded at me this morning instead of just looking straight through me." Ethan laughed. "Wow, a nod. Should we alert the media?" Their shared laughter felt like home, a reminder of what they were all fighting for. After hanging up, Ethan pulled out his math homework with renewed purpose. His sister was battling isolation and grief in a marble fortress. The least he could do was pass algebra. In the penthouse, Destiny created a new note for Samuel, this one with a stick figure boy standing beside a tall building with stars above. On the back, she wrote simply, "You are braver than you know." She slipped it into his favorite book about space exploration, hoping that someday soon he might share his voice as freely as he now shared his silence. The power went out with a dramatic snap, plunging the Blake penthouse into sudden darkness. Outside, thunder crashed against the Manhattan skyline as rain lashed violently against the floor-to-ceiling windows. Destiny Williams moved with practiced efficiency, locating emergency candles in kitchen drawers that Lorraine Blake directed her to with calm instructions. "I haven't seen a storm this fierce in years," Lorraine commented, her silhouette graceful even in the flickering candlelight. She placed a reassuring hand on Samuel's shoulder as the little boy's eyes widened at another thunderclap. Matthew Blake appeared in the doorway, his usual commanding presence softened by the warm glow of candlelight. "The building's generator should kick in soon," he announced, loosening his tie and rolling up his sleeves, a rare gesture of informality. "But they're reporting widespread outages across the city." Rather than retreat to separate rooms as they normally would, the four found themselves gravitating toward the kitchen island. Destiny arranged candles in a protective circle around them, creating an intimate sanctuary against the chaos outside. "When I was little in Brooklyn," Destiny shared, her voice gentle as she arranged a plate of cookies, "my brother Ethan and I would build blanket forts during storms. My mum would tell us stories until we forgot to be scared." Samuel's eyes followed her movements, more engaged than usual. The businessman watched his son carefully, noticing how the boy seemed drawn to the maid's warm presence. "Perhaps we could share stories too," Lorraine suggested, her wisdom showing as she recognized the rare opportunity this blackout presented. "Matthew, remember that camping trip when you were 10, the one with the raccoon?" A reluctant smile crossed Matthew's face. "I've spent years trying to forget that particular humiliation," he said, but began recounting the tale anyway, his voice growing animated as Samuel's attention fixed on him. As laughter rippled through their impromptu circle, Destiny reached for the plate of cookies, offering one to Samuel. The boy hesitated, then extended his small hand. His fingers brushed against Destiny's as he took the treat, a fleeting touch that sent an electric current through the room. Everyone froze. It was the first time Samuel had initiated physical contact with anyone since the tragedy. The simple gesture, reaching out instead of withdrawing, hung in the air like a miracle. Matthew's breath caught audibly. Lorraine pressed her hand to her mouth, eyes glistening. Destiny simply smiled at Samuel, acting as though nothing extraordinary had happened, allowing him the dignity of his brave choice without overwhelming him with reaction. In that candlelit kitchen, as the storm raged outside, something fundamental shifted. Physical connection, once forbidden by grief, had returned, tentative but real, like the first green shoot after a devastating winter. The morning after the storm, Matthew Blake stood by the window of his study, watching the city slowly come back to life. Lorraine found him there, his silhouette rigid against the brightening sky, hands clasped behind his back in that familiar pose of contained emotion. "You haven't slept," she observed, joining him at the window. Matthew nodded slightly, his eyes still fixed on the horizon. "And I keep seeing it, Mother, that moment when Samuel reached for her hand." Lorraine settled into the leather armchair nearby, patient and watchful as her son struggled with words that had been locked away for too long. "Every time I see him smile or reach out," Matthew finally continued, his voice barely above a whisper, "I'm terrified it's just setting us up for another fall. What if we let ourselves hope and then—" He couldn't finish the sentence. The ghost of his wife's absence, still too raw to name. "Like Caroline," Lorraine said gently, speaking the name he couldn't. The businessman's shoulders tensed at the mention of his late wife. "The doctor said Samuel's withdrawal was psychological, not physical. What if he starts walking again, starts living again, and then something happens? I can't watch him break twice. Outside, workers were clearing fallen branches from the street below, methodically restoring order to chaos. Matthew watched them with envy. If only emotional debris could be so easily removed. "You think you're protecting him," his mother said, rising to stand beside him. "But you're really protecting yourself." "That's not fair," he protested, but the words lacked conviction. Lorraine placed a weathered hand on her son's arm. "You've built this fortress around both of you, Matthew. Perfect routines, perfect control, perfect isolation. But look what happened when the storm knocked out the power and forced us all into the same room." Matthew closed his eyes, remembering Samuel's small fingers brushing against Destiny's in that candlelit moment, the first voluntary touch his son had initiated in over a year. "You can't keep Samuel safe by locking out the world," Lorraine continued, her voice gentle but firm. "Grief is a prison, but love is the key." That young woman from Brooklyn understood that instinctively. The matriarch moved toward the door, pausing before she left. "Caroline would want you both to live, not just survive." Long after Lorraine had gone, Matthew remained at the window, her words unsettling the carefully constructed order of his grief. In the apartment below, he could hear the faint sound of Destiny humming as she prepared breakfast, and for the first time in years, he allowed himself to wonder if change might not be something to fear after all. The kitchen's soft lighting cast gentle shadows across the marble countertops as Destiny Williams padded in, startled to find Matthew Blake already there, staring into a steaming mug. Their eyes met briefly before he gestured toward the kettle, a silent invitation. "Chamomile helps sometimes," he offered, his voice unusually soft without its daytime edge. "There's plenty left." Destiny nodded gratefully, preparing her own mug while maintaining the comfortable silence between them. The penthouse felt different at night, less intimidating, more human somehow. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan's lights twinkled like earthbound stars. "Samuel had a good day today," she ventured, settling across from her employer at the kitchen island. Matthew's fingers tightened around his mug. "Yes. I noticed he actually looked at me during dinner. That's new." "Progress comes in small moments," Destiny said, blowing gently on her tea. "My father used to say that." "Your father?" Matthew asked, genuine curiosity replacing his usual reserve. The words tumbled out then, surprising them both. Destiny spoke of her father's sudden heart attack 3 years ago, how she'd found him on their Brooklyn apartment floor one ordinary Tuesday morning. She described her mother Sharon's subsequent health decline, the mounting medical bills, and 17-year-old Ethan's struggles at school. "I'm sorry," she said, suddenly self-conscious. "You didn't ask for my life story." "No," Matthew replied, "but I'm glad to hear it." His gaze was steady, appraising but not judging. "You carry a lot on your shoulders." Destiny shrugged. "We all do what we have to." "My family needs me, like Samuel needs me," Matthew acknowledged, then hesitated before adding, "After my wife died, I thought being strong meant being impenetrable, creating systems, controlling everything." "And now?" Destiny asked. Matthew's laugh was hollow. "Now I watch my son respond to you in ways he never responds to me, and I wonder if I've been doing it all wrong." "Not wrong," Destiny corrected gently. "Just scared." Fear and love look similar sometimes when you're protecting someone. Something shifted in Matthew's expression. Recognition, perhaps. For the first time, he saw not just an employee, but a fellow survivor, someone who understood the weight of responsibility and the terror of failing those who depend on you. "How do you stay so hopeful?" he asked, genuine wonder in his voice. Destiny smiled. "I don't always, but tomorrow always comes, bringing another chance to try again." As they sat in companionable silence, Finishing their tea, an unspoken understanding formed between them, a fragile bridge built on shared experience rather than shared privilege. Neither knew it yet, but this midnight conversation would mark the beginning of a partnership that would heal not just Samuel, but all of them. Together, Destiny Williams and Matthew Blake formed an unlikely alliance. United by their shared goal of bringing Samuel back from the shadows, they began crafting small adventures that might spark life in the withdrawn 4-year-old. Matthew, initially hesitant, found himself caught up in Destiny's infectious enthusiasm as they transformed the sterile penthouse into a playground of imagination. "What if we build him a castle?" Destiny suggested one evening, her eyes bright despite the exhaustion etched on her face. Matthew nodded. And soon the living room became a fortress of pillows and blankets, complete with a drawbridge made from couch cushions. Samuel's eyes widened at the sight, and though he didn't speak, his fingers traced the fabric walls with wonder. The next day, they painted murals on butcher paper taped to the hallway walls, galaxies of stars and oceans teeming with creatures. Matthew surprised himself by joining in, his expensive shirt speckled with blue paint as he helped his son press tiny handprints alongside seahorses. Lorraine watched from the doorway, tears glistening in her eyes. "I haven't seen him this engaged since," she whispered. Unable to finish the sentence, reading became their evening ritual. Destiny would begin stories, and Matthew would help Samuel choose the endings. "Should the dragon be friendly or fierce?" he would ask, and Samuel would point, making choices that shaped his world in small but significant ways. With each passing day, Samuel grew more animated, a slight smile here, a deliberate reach for a toy there, tiny victories that felt monumental after months of stillness. But these breakthroughs came at a cost. Destiny's hours stretched well beyond her scheduled shifts, dark circles forming beneath her eyes as she juggled her responsibilities to the Blakes with nightly calls to Brooklyn, where Sharon's health remained precarious and Ethan struggled with homework alone. Matthew noticed her exhaustion one night as she dozed off mid-story. He gently took the book from her hands, continuing where she'd left off without waking her. Later, he increased her salary without discussion, simply leaving an envelope on the kitchen counter. For Matthew, the cost was emotional. Each time Samuel showed progress, panic would seize his heart. What if this happiness was temporary? What if he lost his son to grief again? Sometimes he would retreat to his study, fighting the urge to reinstate the rigid routines that had kept them both imprisoned, but safe. 2 steps forward, 1 step back, Lorraine reminded him during a particularly difficult evening when Samuel refused to emerge from his room. Healing isn't linear. Every gain felt as fragile as spun glass, every setback a potential avalanche. Yet somehow, day by day, the 3 of them were building something new, a family rising from the ashes of what was lost, with Destiny as its unexpected cornerstone. The morning sun streamed through the penthouse windows, casting golden squares across the polished floor. Samuel Blake sat in his usual spot by the bookshelf, his small fingers tracing the spine of a picture book about dinosaurs. Destiny Williams moved quietly around the living room, dusting and straightening while keeping a watchful eye on the boy. "Where's Rex?" Samuel suddenly asked, his voice barely above a whisper as he looked up with concern. Destiny froze. It was the first time she'd heard his voice in all her months at the Blake residence. The small green dinosaur toy had been Samuel's constant companion before his mother's death, but had mysteriously vanished 3 days ago. "Let me help you find him," she said softly, careful not to make too big a deal of this breakthrough. Her heart raced as she methodically searched the room, finally spotting a flash of green beneath the leather couch. Kneeling down, she reached under and pulled out the dusty toy. "Here he is," Samuel. The 4-year-old's face lit up as he reached for Rex. "Thank you," he said clearly, the words hanging in the air like delicate crystal. Lorraine Blake, who had been passing by with her morning tea, dropped her cup with a crash. Porcelain shattered across the floor. But no one moved to clean it. The elderly woman rushed forward, tears streaming down her wrinkled cheeks as she enveloped her grandson in a gentle embrace. "You spoke," she whispered, rocking him slightly. "You spoke, my darling." Destiny found herself pulled into their circle as Lorraine reached for her hand, squeezing it tightly. For the first time since she'd arrived, the penthouse felt alive with something other than grief. Pure, unfiltered joy echoed through rooms that had known only silence for too long. Word spread quickly. By afternoon, Matthew Blake had received 7 calls from specialists who had previously worked with Samuel. They wanted to observe, document, and study what they called the Williams method. "Absolutely not," Matthew told Dr. Harrington firmly over the phone while pacing his home office. "My son isn't a laboratory experiment." Destiny stood in the doorway, surprised by his vehemence. "What you fail to understand," he continued, his voice gaining strength, "is that science didn't break through to Samuel. Love did. Destiny didn't use methodology. She used patience and genuine care." After ending the call, Matthew looked up at her, vulnerability evident in his usually guarded expression. "They want to study you like some phenomenon," he said quietly. "But they don't understand that what you gave Samuel can't be replicated in a clinical setting." Destiny nodded, understanding the weight of his words. "Some things can't be measured or documented," she replied. "Sometimes healing happens in the spaces between the scientific explanations." That evening, Samuel spoke 3 more words, each one a miracle that bound them all together in a shared hope that had been absent for far too long. The morning had begun like any other in the Blake penthouse, until a sharp cry from the East Wing sent Destiny Williams racing down the marble hallway. She found Lorraine Blake on the bathroom floor, her face twisted with pain, but her eyes filled with embarrassment. "Just a silly slip," Lorraine insisted as Destiny helped her to the bed. The family doctor confirmed nothing was broken, just bruising and a sprained wrist that required rest and care. Matthew Blake, upon hearing the news, immediately suggested hiring a specialized nurse, but his mother refused. "Destiny is all the help I need," the older woman declared, patting the maid's hand with unexpected affection. "She already knows my ways." This new responsibility added another layer to Destiny's already overwhelming schedule. Her days now began at 5 in the morning, preparing Samuel's breakfast before helping Lorraine with her morning routine. The hours between were filled with Samuel's therapy exercises, Lorraine's medication schedules, and the household duties that never seemed to end. Late at night, after both Samuel and his grandmother had fallen asleep, Destiny would collapse into her small room and call Brooklyn. Sharon Williams's voice sounded weaker with each passing day, and the updates about Ethan were increasingly concerning. His math teacher called again, her mother whispered one evening. "He's missing assignments." Falling asleep in class. Guilt washed over Destiny as she realized how her absence was affecting her brother. The teenager had taken on extra chores at home while trying to maintain his studies, all without complaint. The weight of 2 families, one tied by blood, one by circumstance, pressed heavily on her shoulders. The next afternoon, while helping Samuel practice his speech exercises, Destiny had an idea. She dialed her home number and handed the phone to the boy. "George, say hello," she encouraged gently. Samuel clutched the device, his small fingers trembling slightly. "Hello," he whispered. "This is Samuel Blake." On the other end, Ethan's surprised voice crackled through the speaker. The conversation that followed was halting and simple, Samuel asking about Ethan's school, Ethan patiently answering and asking about Samuel's toys. But the impact was profound. That night, Sharon called back with news that Ethan had completed all his homework and was planning his schedule for catching up in his classes. Whatever Samuel said to him worked magic, her mother marveled. Destiny smiled as she hung up, realizing that the healing she'd brought to the Blake household was flowing outward, touching lives beyond these penthouse walls. In helping Samuel find his voice, she had inadvertently given her brother something he desperately needed: purpose and perspective. The ripples of care were spreading further than anyone could have imagined. The afternoon sun streamed through the penthouse windows, casting golden rectangles across the plush carpet, where Samuel Blake sat surrounded by colourful Lego blocks. Destiny Williams knelt beside him, helping arrange the pieces into what might become a castle or a spaceship. The beauty of imagination was that it didn't need to decide just yet. Matthew Blake lingered in the doorway. His tie loosened after a long day of meetings. He watched his son's small fingers work methodically with the plastic blocks, a sight that once seemed impossible during those dark months when Samuel wouldn't even look at a toy. "Would you like to join us, Mr. Blake?" Destiny asked, noticing his presence without looking up. Matthew hesitated, then slowly lowered himself to the floor. His expensive suit pants meeting the carpet in what felt like a surrender to something greater than propriety. "I'm not very good at this," he admitted, picking up a red block. "Neither am I," Samuel whispered, his voice still a precious rarity. "But Destiny says it's not about being good," the maid smiled, her eyes meeting Matthew's over his son's head. "It's about being together," she finished. For 20 minutes, they built in companionable silence. 3 pairs of hands creating something that none of them could have made alone. Samuel's tower grew taller than expected, wobbling precariously as he stretched to add one more piece. "Careful," Matthew cautioned, his businessman's instinct to prevent failure surfacing automatically, but Destiny placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Let him try," she murmured. Samuel's tongue poked out in concentration as he balanced on his tiptoes, a movement that would have been unthinkable months ago, and placed the final block. For a second, the tower swayed, then steadied. The boy's face broke into a radiant smile. "I did it!" he exclaimed, and then burst into peals of laughter when the tower finally collapsed in a cascade of blocks. Matthew Blake's laughter joined his son's, deep, genuine, and slightly rusty from disuse. The sound filled the room that had known too much silence, too many tears. Destiny couldn't help but join in, her own laughter blending with theirs in perfect harmony. In that moment, watching father and son playfully rebuild their fallen creation, Destiny realized something profound. The walls that had separated them, grief, class, mistrust, were crumbling faster than Samuel's tower. She was no longer just the help, the outsider from Brooklyn with responsibilities across the bridge. Here, among scattered Lego blocks and afternoon sunlight, she was helping build something far more precious than towers, piece by colorful piece. In the heart of Manhattan, a new family was taking shape. The whispers began at the Westwood Foundation dinner, where the Blakes had been patrons for years. Destiny Williams felt the stares as she helped Samuel Blake navigate the crowded ballroom in his wheelchair. Though she wore a simple but elegant black dress, a far cry from her usual work attire, her Brooklyn accent and unfamiliar face marked her as an outsider. "Is that the help?" Destiny overheard a woman in diamonds murmur to her companion. "Matthew's letting the staff attend galas now." Lorraine Blake squeezed Destiny's shoulder reassuringly. "Ignore them, dear. Old money, old minds." Over the following weeks, the scrutiny intensified. At a playground near the penthouse, Mothers pulled their children away when Samuel and Destiny approached. At a dinner party, a longtime family friend cornered Matthew Blake near the bar. "We're concerned, Matt," the man said, swirling his scotch. "This girl from Brooklyn, she's getting awfully close to Samuel. People are talking about her influence. Is it really appropriate?" Matthew's jaw tightened as he watched Destiny across the room, patiently helping his son build a tower with cocktail napkins. He saw the joy in Samuel's eyes, a light he'd thought extinguished forever. That night, after tucking Samuel in, Matthew paced his study. Family photographs lined the walls, reminders of social connections spanning generations. The Blakes had always cared about appearances, about fitting into their exclusive circle. But those connections hadn't helped Samuel take his first steps since the accident. They hadn't made him laugh again. Destiny had. The annual Children's Hospital Gala arrived on a rainy Saturday. The ballroom of the Plaza Hotel glittered with Manhattan's elite. Destiny had planned to stay home with Samuel, but Matthew insisted they all attend. "Samuel should see the world beyond our walls," he'd said firmly. When they arrived, the usual murmurs followed. Destiny focused on Samuel, pretending not to notice the sideways glances and whispered comments about her background. Midway through the evening, Matthew Blake was called to the podium to announce his family's annual donation. He straightened his tie, scanned the crowd, and made a decision that would reshape their lives. "This year's contribution is made in honor of someone special," he announced, his voice steady. "Destiny Williams, who came into our home as Samuel's caregiver and showed us that healing begins with love, not privilege." Gasps rippled through the crowd as Matthew gestured for Destiny to join him. "And my son is walking again because of this extraordinary woman. Her background doesn't define her, her heart does." Several couples turned away, clearly disapproving. But when Matthew returned to their table, Destiny gave him something precious, a genuine smile that reached her eyes for the first time since she'd arrived at the penthouse. "Thank you," she whispered, her hand briefly touching his. "No," Matthew replied. "A thank you for teaching us what really matters." Samuel's progress was nothing short of miraculous. Each day brought new words, hesitant at first, then flowing with increasing confidence. His laughter, once so rare it had startled everyone in the penthouse, now echoed through the halls regularly. Most telling of all, he had begun asking for Miss Destiny whenever she was out of sight, his small voice carrying a note of urgency until she appeared. "He's becoming a different child," Lorraine remarked one evening as she watched her grandson carefully arrange his building blocks. "I never thought I'd see him this animated again." Matthew nodded, his eyes reflecting a mixture of gratitude and something deeper whenever they followed Destiny moving around the room. The businessman had softened, his sharp edges worn down by months of witnessing small miracles. Then came the call that shattered Destiny's fragile balance. Sharon Williams had collapsed at home, and Ethan had found her unconscious on the kitchen floor. The doctors were cautiously optimistic, but her condition required immediate attention and extended care. "I need to go back to Brooklyn," Destiny announced, her hands trembling as she packed an overnight bag. "Ethan is alone at the hospital. He's just a kid. He shouldn't have to handle this by himself." Samuel clung to her leg, sensing her distress. "Destiny, stay," he pleaded, his eyes wide with fear of abandonment. Matthew pulled her aside while Lorraine distracted the child. "Let me help," he offered, his voice low and urgent. "I can arrange for the best specialists, private nursing care, whatever Sharon needs." Destiny hesitated, pride warring with practicality. "I can't accept that kind of—" "You can and you will," Matthew interrupted firmly. "Take a week off. Be with your family. I'll handle everything here." But even as the words left his mouth, Samuel began to cry, reaching for Destiny with desperate hands. The sound tore at her heart, reminding her of those first silent months when he wouldn't even look at her. "I can't leave him now," she whispered, watching as Lorraine tried unsuccessfully to comfort the child. "He's so close to walking," the physical therapist said with consistent encouragement. "He might take his first steps any day now." Matthew looked between his son and the woman who had brought life back into their home. "Then we'll find another way," he said finally. That night, after making arrangements for Sharon's care and speaking with Ethan for nearly an hour, Destiny sat in Samuel's room, watching him sleep. Her heart was pulled in two directions, toward her blood family in Brooklyn and toward this newfound family who needed her just as desperately. Samuel stirred in his sleep, his hand reaching out instinctively. Destiny took it gently, making her choice. Some bonds, once formed, couldn't be broken, not even for a week. After months of heated discussions and extensive research, Matthew Blake finally made the decision that would change everything. The renowned Evergreen Rehabilitation Center in Seattle offered innovative therapies that conventional doctors had dismissed as experimental. Despite the skepticism from his business associates, Matthew was willing to try anything that might help his son. "I think this is our best chance," he told Destiny Williams one evening as they reviewed the center's brochure together. His voice carried both hope and fear, emotions that had become familiar companions in their shared journey. Destiny nodded, studying the facility's details. "I'll be with him every step of the way," she promised, already mentally preparing for what this would mean for her own family back in Brooklyn. She called Sharon Williams that night, explaining her extended absence. Despite her mother's labored breathing on the phone, Sharon insisted her daughter follow this path. "Ethan and I will manage," her mother assured her. "That little boy needs you now." The flight to Seattle was Samuel Blake's first time on an airplane. He sat between Matthew and Destiny, clutching his favorite stuffed dinosaur as the aircraft climbed through clouds. The 4-year-old's eyes widened with each bump of turbulence, but he remained brave, occasionally squeezing Destiny's hand. Their first week at the center brought frustration. Samuel refused to engage with the therapists, retreating into silence whenever strangers approached. Matthew nearly cancelled everything after the third failed session, pacing their hotel room in agitation. "We shouldn't have come," he muttered. "This was a mistake." Destiny watched him quietly before suggesting, "Let me try something different tomorrow." The next morning, she brought Samuel to the therapy room early. Instead of following the structured program, she recreated their games from home, building pillow forts in the corner of the rehabilitation gym, telling stories about brave explorers who conquered mountains. When the therapist arrived, Destiny didn't step away, but remained as Samuel's translator and partner. On the 7th day, it happened. While practicing with parallel bars, Samuel Blake took his first independent step, then another, his small face contorted with effort, sweat beading on his forehead as Destiny held her hands just inches from his sides, ready to catch him but not touching. "You're doing it, Samuel," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "You're walking." Matthew stood frozen at the doorway, witnessing the miracle he'd stopped believing was possible. When Samuel reached the end of the bars, the boy looked up with an expression of pure triumph. The joy was indescribable, but as their 3-week program neared its end, a new anxiety emerged. Would returning to New York, to the penthouse filled with memories, undo all their progress? Neither Destiny nor Matthew dared voice this fear aloud, but it hung between them, unspoken yet palpable. The Blake penthouse had undergone a metamorphosis in the months following their return from Seattle. Where once sterile marble floors gleamed with an almost hospital-like precision, now colorful playmats created islands of imagination. Samuel Blake's artwork adorned walls previously reserved for austere modern paintings. each crayon masterpiece hung with the same reverence as the discarded Rothkos and Kandinskys. Destiny Williams moved through these transformed spaces with a newfound confidence, kneading dough in the kitchen that now regularly filled with the comforting scent of fresh bread. The aroma seemed to chase away the last lingering shadows of grief that had once permeated every corner of the Manhattan residence. "Look what I made today," Samuel called out, his small feet padding across the floor as he carried yet another drawing to add to the gallery. His progress continued to astonish everyone, especially Matthew, who watched his son's transformation with quiet wonder. Lorraine Blake had taken to sitting in the sunroom each morning, surrounded by the chaos of toys and books, smiling as she sipped her tea. "This place finally feels like a home again," she told Destiny one afternoon, reaching for her hand with surprising strength. "You've brought life back to these walls." Though Destiny had become an integral part of their daily existence, she still felt the occasional pang of displacement. At a dinner party Matthew hosted for business associates, she found herself hesitating at the threshold between the kitchen and dining room, momentarily uncertain whether to serve or be seated. The weight of her Brooklyn upbringing pressed against her shoulders in these moments, a constant reminder of the world she had come from. Matthew noticed her hesitation and crossed the room, taking her hand before his colleagues. "Everyone," he announced, "this is Destiny, the remarkable woman who taught my son to laugh again." The genuine pride in his voice made her cheeks warm. Later that night, after helping Samuel with his bedtime routine, Destiny called Ethan. Her brother's excited voice filled her ear as he described his improving grades and new friends at school. Sharon Williams could be heard in the background, her voice stronger than it had been in months, thanks to the specialized care Matthew had arranged. "You belong there, sis," Ethan said suddenly, as if reading her thoughts across the miles. "And to stop acting like you're just visiting." Destiny gazed around her room, no longer the staff quarters, but a space Matthew had insisted she redecorate to her taste. Samuel's drawings adorned her walls too, little love notes from a child who had found his voice again. She belonged, yet didn't belong. The contradiction followed her through the penthouse like a shadow, even as the Blakes embraced her as family. The question remained, could someone from her world truly become part of theirs? The autumn sun streamed through the penthouse windows, bathing the living room in golden light. Samuel Blake stood by the window, his small hands pressed against the glass as he watched birds soar across the Manhattan skyline. His steps were still unsteady, but the confidence in his movements was unmistakable, a testament to months of therapy, patience, and unwavering support. Destiny Williams entered the room carrying a tray of apple slices and cookies, her heart swelling with pride at the sight of the boy standing independently. Just 18 months ago, the child hadn't taken a single step, trapped in silence and grief. Now he turned toward her, his face lighting up with recognition and joy. "Look at the birds," Samuel exclaimed, pointing excitedly. His vocabulary had expanded remarkably in recent weeks. Each new word, a victory celebrated by the entire household. Matthew Blake looked up from his laptop, his expression softening as he watched his son's excitement. The businessman had gradually shed his rigid exterior, allowing himself to experience joy again after years of guarding against further heartbreak. "They're flying so high," Destiny responded, setting down the tray and kneeling beside Samuel, "just like you're getting stronger every day." The boy turned suddenly, wrapping his arms around her neck in a fierce hug. Then, with his face pressed against her shoulder, he whispered a single word that froze time in the sunlit room. "Mommy." The word hung in the air like a suspended crystal, fragile and brilliant. Destiny's breath caught in her throat as she met Matthew's startled gaze across the room. Lorraine Blake, who had been arranging flowers nearby, dropped a stem, her hand flying to her mouth. "Samuel," Matthew began, uncertain how to respond, his voice thick with emotion. But Samuel simply tightened his grip around Destiny's neck, repeating the word with absolute certainty. "Mommy." Tears spilled down Destiny's cheeks as she held the boy close. All her doubts about belonging in this world so different from Brooklyn, about being enough for this family fractured by loss, dissolved in that single moment of pure acceptance. "I love you, Samuel," she whispered, her voice breaking. Matthew crossed the room slowly, kneeling beside them both. His hand found Destiny's, their fingers intertwining as Samuel embraced them both. In his son's innocent declaration, Matthew recognized the truth he'd been slowly accepting. Destiny Williams had become essential to them all, rebuilding what grief had shattered. Lorraine watched the tableau with glistening eyes, seeing not the wealthy businessman and the former maid from Brooklyn, but simply a family finding its way back to wholeness. In that golden afternoon light, their separate paths had finally merged into a single destiny, rewritten by love's patient hand. The lavender fields rippled like a purple ocean under the gentle breeze, their fragrance carrying promises of new beginnings. Matthew Blake had arranged everything meticulously. The small gathering at the rented farmhouse outside Seattle felt worlds away from the sterile penthouse where their journey had begun. Samuel Blake chased butterflies nearby, his laughter carrying across the field, while Lorraine Blake watched from the porch, dabbing at her eyes. Matthew had invited Sharon Williams and Ethan Williams to join them, flying them in from Brooklyn. The teenager stood awkwardly at first, but soon found himself playing catch with Samuel, their unlikely friendship blossoming under the Washington sun. "You've given us so much more than I could have ever asked for," Matthew said quietly to Destiny Williams as they walked through the purple blooms. Not just Samuel's recovery, but life itself. The businessman who once measured success in portfolios and properties now measured it in his son's steps and smiles. The transformation wasn't lost on Destiny, who remembered the cold, distant man who had interviewed her all those months ago. "I never expected any of this," she admitted, thinking of her first days in the penthouse, the rigid rules and silent meals. "I was just trying to survive, to help my family." The sun began its descent, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Matthew led her to a small clearing where a blanket had been spread. He had planned this moment carefully, yet his hands trembled as he reached for hers. "Before you came, we were ghosts haunting our own lives," he said, his voice catching. "Samuel was trapped in silence, and I was trapped in grief. You showed us how to live again." Lorraine watched from a distance, her heart full as she saw her son finally letting go of the past. Sharon leaned on her arm, the two mothers united in witnessing this unexpected miracle. When Matthew knelt before Destiny, a small velvet box in his palm, time seemed to suspend. He wasn't just offering marriage, he was offering partnership, healing, and shared dreams that bridged their different worlds. "You crossed thresholds I built to keep everyone out," he whispered. "Will you stay?" Destiny trembled, overwhelmed by the journey that had brought her from Brooklyn's crowded streets to this sunlit field. Every doubt she'd harbored about belonging in the Blakes' world dissolved as she looked into Matthew's eyes and saw home. "Yes," she answered, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. As the family gathered around them in celebration, Destiny realized she was no longer just the maid who had once stood nervously at their door. She had become the heart of a new family, forged not by blood but by courage, compassion and love that had transformed them all. The seasons had turned twice since that fateful afternoon in the lavender fields. The Blake penthouse, once a monument to grief, now burst with the chaotic energy of a true home. Toys scattered across imported rugs, finger paintings adorned refrigerator doors, and the sound of laughter echoed through halls that had known only silence for too long. Destiny Williams Blake stood at the window, watching the Manhattan skyline shimmer in the morning light. She smiled as Samuel raced through the living room, his legs strong and sure where once they had been motionless. The boy paused to show her his latest Lego creation, eyes bright with the confidence that had blossomed under her care. "Mom, look what I made for Grandma!" he exclaimed, holding up a colorful structure that vaguely resembled Lorraine's favorite flower garden. Matthew entered the room, his tie slightly askew, a small but significant departure from his once rigid appearance. He placed a gentle kiss on Destiny's cheek before kneeling to admire his son's handiwork. The businessman who once measured success in profit margins now counted it in his son's smiles. "Your grandmother will love it," Matthew assured Samuel, ruffling his hair. "She's bringing Ethan from the airport this afternoon." Destiny's heart swelled at the mention of her brother. Since graduating high school, Ethan had been accepted to Columbia University with Matthew's guidance, though the teenager had insisted on earning his scholarship through his own merit. Sharon's health had stabilized with proper medical care, allowing her to visit monthly from Brooklyn. That evening, they gathered around the dining table: Destiny, Matthew, Samuel, Lorraine, Ethan, and Sharon. A family crafted not by blood alone, but by choice and perseverance. As they shared stories and passed dishes, Destiny caught Matthew's eye across the table, their silent communication perfected through shared struggles and triumphs. Later, as Samuel demonstrated his running skills for his uncle Ethan in the penthouse's newly converted playroom, Sharon squeezed her daughter's hand. "You built something beautiful here," she whispered. "Something impossible." Destiny watched as Samuel tackled Ethan to the ground, both of them dissolving into laughter while Lorraine documented the moment on her smartphone. Matthew stood nearby, his posture relaxed, protective barriers long since dismantled. "They're not impossible," Destiny replied, "just hidden, waiting for someone stubborn enough to believe." The penthouse that had once felt like a prison now served as the foundation for a family reborn. Samuel's recovery had taught them all that healing wasn't found in perfect silence or rigid control, but in the messy, imperfect moments of genuine connection. And Destiny, who had arrived with nothing but determination and a homemade puppet, had become not just the catalyst for a miracle, but its rightful architect.